Ethan, would you suggest the Job Guide 360 guide for candidates getting ready for interviews?
Yes, without a doubt. It is well structured and makes preparation straightforward.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we are pulling back the curtain on a really demanding role, but also one that's typically very well paid, the environmental manager. And this isn't just, about having good intentions. It's complex. It involves navigating these constantly shifting regulations. So the hiring process, it's got to be rigorous.
Oh, it absolutely is, yeah. We've sort of been acting as internal guides, helping an organization figure out how to hire the best. And we're using Indeed's employer resource library, which is, it's huge. Over 15,000 articles all aimed at helping businesses manage their people better.
Wow.
And our goal here, our mission, it's pretty critical. We're not just reading off interview questions. We're trying to dissect them, really figure out what is the employer actually trying to learn with each answer they get.
Okay, yeah, let's unpack that. So for you listening, we've kind of broken this down into 4 main chunks. First, the absolute must-haves, the professional foundation. Then, those crucial soft skills you need for managing a team, focused on compliance. Third, how they actually execute, strategy for big projects. And finally, the real stress tests. How does a top candidate deal with, failure and conflict?
Yeah, the tough stuff.
Exactly. Let's kick off with maybe the most basic driver, the why. Why this demanding career? So when an employer asks a potential environmental manager, why did you pick this field? They already know it pays well, but our sources say they're digging for something deeper. Right? A passion beyond the salary. Why is that specific, genuine enthusiasm so important here?
Well, because the pressure in this job is just immense. You've got regulations, deadlines. Wow. If someone's only there for the paycheck, the stress, the complexity, maybe the potential for things going wrong with regulations, it's just going to lead to burnout fast.
Yeah, it makes sense.
So the interviewer, they really need to see that the candidate's values align with the role. They want to hear enthusiasm for, actual environmental issues, climate change, protecting species, tackling pollution. And they want specifics, not just buzzwords.
So not just saying, I care about the planet, but actual examples.
Precisely. They want to hear about things like maybe volunteering with environmental consultants early on or working for an NGO. It shows their interest wasn't just theoretical, It shows they were already involved in the mission before it became this high-paying career path.
Okay. So once that passion's kind of established, then it shifts to the credentials, I assume. What does that educational foundation typically look like for a strong EM candidate?
Yeah, it moves there pretty quick. You're definitely looking at post-secondary education. Bachelor's, often in environmental engineering, is a good starting point. But ideally, they're looking for a master's degree in environmental management.
Okay.
But what really makes the best candidates stand out is showing they're committed to continuous learning. They should talk about, say, taking extra electives in natural science or environmental policy. And, critically, that they stay current with best practices, maybe through professional groups.
Like that Canadian Association of Environmental Management mentioned in the source? Is that the kind of thing?
Exactly like that. That's a perfect example. Being part of a recognized professional body like that, whether it's in Canada or a similar accredited group elsewhere, it signals commitment. It shows they're keeping up with regulatory changes, which is, that's the absolute lifeblood of this job.
And experience. I'm guessing this isn't an entry-level gig.
Oh, not at all. No. Years of experience are basically non-negotiable, and interviewers want specifics about leadership roles, not just being part of a team.
Right.
Candidates really need to point to times they actively led specialists. Maybe, I led a team of 6 environmental specialists on a compliance project. And they also need a solid track record of actually developing strategies, things like waste reduction programs for the company or sustainable development initiatives, real results.
Okay, so moving past the resume, the CV.
Yeah.
Let's talk management style. Like any manager role, soft skills are vital. But here they seem directly tied to compliance, right? What kind of style are employers looking for?
The sources consistently point towards a collaborative style. And what that means in this context is a manager who gets things done by actively promoting really clear communication, building good working relationships, and genuinely motivating their team.
Okay.
They need strong teamwork and interpersonal skills because, let's face it, they often have to get buy-in for policies that can feel complex or restrictive.
Yeah, that makes sense. Now, here's something I found really interesting. Adaptability. The sources suggest a top candidate's style might actually evolve. They gave a specific example, a manager shifting from a laissez-faire approach to being more of a charismatic leader. Can you break that down? What does that transition look like practically?
That's a great point because it really highlights flexibility. So laissez-faire is basically hands-off, right? You delegate a lot, give people autonomy, step in only when needed. That can work well, maybe with smaller experienced teams.
Sure.
But the story showed that as this manager started leading bigger teams, they had to become more charismatic, meaning more visible, easier for folks to reach, more present in the day-to-day operations.
Ah, okay.
That shift proved they can adapt their style based on the team's needs or maybe changing regulatory pressures. It's crucial flexibility.
So it seems like that lesson about adapting your management style, well, it applies pretty much anywhere, doesn't it? Whether you're leading environmental specialists or, I don't know, a kitchen crew.
Absolutely. It's a universal leadership trait.
So if we tie this all together, what's the sort of comprehensive skill set employers are scanning for? Connecting those soft skills back to the technical side.
Well, it kind of bundles into 4 main buckets: personnel management, communication, collaboration, and then general leadership and organization skills.
Okay.
And within those, you see specific traits they want. Self-motivation is big. Strong attention to detail, obviously critical, with regulations, really good research skills, and just this enthusiasm for tackling tricky problems, often in a pretty fast-paced setting. They need the organizational chops to meet the legal stuff and the people skills to make the team want to meet it.
And when it comes to rolling out a big new environmental policy, communication is everything. How should an EM introduce new rules effectively? It can't just be an email memo, right?
No, definitely not. They need to show they practice active listening and transparency. So the methods need to hit on multiple fronts. Things like actual physical meetings to explain the why and the what's face-to-face. Detailed emails are still important, outlining the process clearly. But crucially, and this shows active listening, they need to actively ask for feedback from the team. That way, people don't just understand the instructions, they hopefully feel some ownership, which, minimizes resistance down the line.
All right, let's get into the core job function. Execution, making sure the company stays compliant. How does an environmental manager who needs to be ahead of the curve on regulations actually stay informed? What are they doing day to day?
They really have to show a genuine passion for staying current and a rigorous approach to it. This means constantly reading professional journals, research papers, industry articles. They need to be regularly checking governmental websites for new legislation, federal, provincial, state, whatever applies. And yes, networking helps, as do updates from those professional associations we talked about. It shows their knowledge isn't stuck in the past. They're actively bringing in the latest legal requirements.
So once they know the latest trend or rule, how does that ideal candidate describe their process for actually implementing a big new policy or strategy? Is there a standard approach?
Yeah, what's interesting is the sources describe a very structured kind of 4-stage process. First up is planning. That's defining the project scope, figuring out who all the stakeholders are, and assessing the potential environmental impacts.
Okay, stage 1.
Second is monitoring. And this is key. It's about looking at the potential effects of the strategy before you go all in and communicating those risks or benefits up the chain to management.
Right, like a pre-check.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Then third is implementation. This is where you're actually rolling it out, measuring the real-world impacts as you go, and overseeing the team's activities. And finally, 4th stage, analysis. Communicating the results, the measurable outcomes, and giving that final feedback to upper management.
That sounds, well, almost a bit rigid for today's fast-moving business world. Is there any wiggle room in that 4-stage process for, like, quick changes or emergencies?
Well, the rigidity is kind of the point, isn't it? In a highly regulated field, that structure enforces accountability, but the rigor itself actually helps identify where things might go wrong. The flexibility comes in how quickly you adapt during the monitoring and analysis stages if the early data shows problems. The framework keeps everyone focused on the high stakes involved. Like that anecdote the sources gave about project leadership.
Yeah, let's use that specific story. What does successful project leadership actually look like in action for an EM?
It's a really powerful example. The manager led 15 environmental experts to create a compliance strategy for an oil and gas company building a brand new refinery. I mean, just think about the potential consequences if they got that wrong.
Huge fines, delays.
Yeah, massive. So the project demanded incredibly meticulous work. They had to research every relevant piece of legislation, federal and provincial. They evaluated similar refineries to set benchmarks. They had to clearly define the scope of work and then create a formal, measurable action plan. It really shows both that high-level strategic leadership and almost microscopic attention to detail.
And with all those moving parts, the research, the benchmarking, how do they actually know if the project is staying on track? How do they gauge success along the way?
It comes down heavily to organization and how they structure the tasks. Basically, they set it up so that completing specific individual tasks directly signals progress towards the overall goal.
Okay.
The real trick, and the manager's challenge, is finding that balance between delegating, effectively giving the experts freedom to do their work while constantly keeping an eye on the big picture to make absolutely sure that regulatory compliance isn't being compromised.
We've talked a lot about the rules and the rigor, but now let's get into the human side of things. Because the real test of any manager often comes when things inevitably go wrong, whether it's their own mistake or someone on their team. Let's start with self-accountability. How do the best candidates talk about handling their own failures?
Yeah, this is critical. They need to project calmness, clear thinking, and strong problem-solving skills, especially under pressure. The sequence interviewers want to hear isn't just about saying sorry, it's about fixing the system.
Okay, so what's the sequence?
First, clearly acknowledge the mistake, no excuses. Second, immediately inform upper management. Transparency is key, no trying to hide it. Third, apologize, yes, but also identify a cost-effective solution.
Wait, I want to pause on that cost-effective. So they can't just throw company money at fixing it.
Exactly right. They need to show fiscal responsibility even while correcting a compliance issue. Fix it, but fix it smartly. And then fourth, crucially, they must design strategies to prevent it from happening again and share those preventative measures with management. It shows accountability and a forward-thinking approach.
Okay, dealing with your own mess is one thing, but as an EM, you're ultimately responsible for the compliance of your whole team. What happens when it's a specialist on the team who's the problem? Let's take the case of a worker who's just not following the rules non-compliant.
Right. The focus here, initially at least, is on patience and communication. The first step is to talk to the worker and understand the why. Was it a misunderstanding? If they just didn't get the instructions, okay, then the EM repeats the training, clarifies things.
Makes sense.
But if the non-compliance was deliberate, like they knew the rule and broke it anyway, then the EM has to be very clear. They need to explain exactly why following those instructions is necessary and how that specific action puts the entire organization's environmental compliance at risk. It starts with education, not necessarily immediate discipline.
Okay, and what about the flip side? Not someone breaking rules, but someone who's trying hard, but just struggling, underperforming in a demanding role.
This really calls for empathy and strong motivational leadership. The first step is reaching out privately to understand what specific challenges that expert is facing. Is it workload? A skill gap? Something else? Then the EM works with the expert to create a collaborative action plan to help them get back on track. And finally, they monitor progress closely, offering support along the way. The aim is really to support and develop the talent if possible, not just punish the struggle.
That's a really important distinction.
Okay.
Before we wrap this segment, let's loop back to the manager themselves. We talked about how they manage their team, but how does the ideal candidate evaluate their own performance as a leader? I was quite struck by the detail on this.
Yeah, this is a great detail, isn't it? They don't just rely on their boss's opinion. Top candidates actively seek out objective data. Specifically, they solicit confidential evaluation forms from their own teammates, the people who report to them.
Wow.
Once they have that feedback, they actually create a formal action plan addressing the areas needing improvement. And then they discuss that plan, those areas, with their own managers. It shows a real commitment to growth and, importantly, the ability to take constructive criticism on board, which is, a hallmark of any strong leader. So if we just summarize what we've sort of pulled out here, the ideal environmental manager, they need this really rare, quite delicate balance. On one hand, deep, up-to-the-minute technical and regulatory knowledge, that whole strategy and compliance framework we discussed. But just as important are those exceptional, adaptable, soft skills. Things demonstrated through collaborative leadership, empathy when resolving conflicts, and that meticulous attention to detail, even when admitting they messed up. They're managing both the complex regulations and the human beings who have to implement them.
Yeah, that balance is key. And that structural thinking, understanding the why behind the questions, that's valuable regardless of your specific field, isn't it? We've seen the EM role hinges on communication, policy training, managing compliance. We mentioned the sources listed, tons of other jobs, architect, data scientist, welder, a huge range. And we saw how an EM needs to be willing to shift their leadership style, maybe from that hands-off laissez-faire to a more visible, charismatic approach, and how they use confidential team feedback for self-improvement.
Yeah.
So here's the final thought for you, the listener, to chew on. Imagine you were hiring for a management role in a completely different setting, let's say a production manager in a factory. How might those core behavioral expectations, the willingness to adapt your style, the use of confidential feedback, how might those apply or maybe differ in that environment? An environment where the big risks might be physical safety or production efficiency, rather than regulatory fines. How universal are these fundamental principles of effective leadership? Something to think about. Thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive.